Thank you, Robin, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WorkSource Business Services Strategies for Economic Recovery. Today, John and I have been tasked with a presentation that will focus on the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on Georgia's workforce and introduce efforts to aid recovery utilizing business services tools and strategies. All right, so we all know that the pandemic kind of hit us all out of nowhere. No one could have planned for this. No one knew what was coming, and we definitely did not know how far it would go. So we just want to take a brief look at economic recovery and some tools and strategies that we can offer from WorkSource Georgia that could aid you in your local areas. So let's go ahead and move on to our industry impact. So industry impact. At the state level, looking across the state, there have been many hard-hit industries. You guys know better than we do the industries that have been hit locally in your local areas. At the state level, we were able to see, looking at data, some of the hardest hit industries during the pandemic across all regions. Hospitality was the #1 hit industry. Of course, you had travel that was being decreased, so you didn't have a lot of people traveling, which means that there were not a lot of business for the hospitality industry, including your hotels, your motels, your resorts in the state of Georgia. So a lot of employers had to close their doors, which ended up with employees being let go due to the pandemic. You also have retail, including your small businesses, food services. Again, people were afraid, people were in fear at the beginning of this pandemic, so a lot of people were staying home. We had the shelter in place order, so no one was moving around going to retail as far as shopping and food services. And then you have healthcare. Although nurses were in high demand, as we've seen across the country, there were other parts of healthcare that was hit hardest during the pandemic, such as behavior care, such as some of the assisted care as well that was hit hard during the pandemic as a part of the industry impact. Now we have a slide that we're going to look at that shows the state unemployment claims that also gives a better understanding of the industry impact.
Awesome, thank you, Brittany. So before we dive into what the chart actually tells us, this data comes from the Georgia labor market, which is a tool provided by the Department of Labor. And what that does is it calculates how many unemployment claims there are every week and divides them up by their industry, local area, where they're happening, and they also do one for the state as a whole. So this data is in part inspired by WARN notices that are received by the Department of Labor and then processed by us. If you don't know what a WARN notice is, basically what it is it's a document that provides insight into a closure or layoff that a company is going to be facing or has already faced in some cases. And it has everything from how many people are affected, what jobs are affected, were there unions involved, do they have bumping rights, so on and so forth, will it be temporary even. So that's where this data comes from. And as Brittany said before, you can tell immediately that accommodation and food services is the hardest hit industry in the state of Georgia, followed by healthcare and retail, as well as manufacturing. But this is largely in part to stay-at-home orders, especially for accommodation and food services and retail, industries that are heavily involved with peer-to-peer contact and non-essential worker classifications, you could say, especially for things like food services and places like retail stores. So that had a big effect on how the state was affected. At the same time, you can tell from the data trends that April was obviously the biggest month for the pandemic and layoffs. However, as we can tell, it's slowly dropped off, but this isn't to say that there aren't more WARN notices signifying closures coming in. And at the same time, some of those closures and layoffs were temporary. And now that we're getting back into the swing of things with the economy, places have reopened and established social distancing measures. So keep in mind that this data is not exactly a perfect picture for what's happening in the state, but it's a good indicator given the resources that we have. So moving on from that, we've got our Georgia labor market.
So during the pandemic, the Georgia Department of Labor had a peak. Of course, just like John mentioned, during the stay-at-home orders, individuals were not going to work, and then you had people becoming unemployed that was once employed. So during the pandemic, the unemployment rate reached a high of 12.6%. As of August, unemployment has decreased to 5.6%. So this shows a steady progression as people are getting back to work, as new jobs are coming available, and the job market is strengthening. Commissioner Butler stated in early September, early this month, that nearly 151,000 jobs are listed online at employergeorgia.com, which we know Employer Georgia is the DOL site. Now, I know that for some of our local areas, that the WorkSource site for the local areas do cross-post jobs there from the Employer Georgia site, along with Indeed and other sites as well. This job total has more than doubled since the beginning of the pandemic, with just 73,000 jobs listed during April 2020. So that shows us that jobs are available, and that although the unemployment rate is decreasing, we need to focus on helping individuals get back to work. We've recovered about 65% of the jobs lost since the pandemic, which began around mid-March, according to Commissioner Butler. Now, we do have a graph that we want to show you guys that will give you an idea of the UI claims.
Awesome. So like the previous chart that we showed you, for the industries, this is a breakdown from the same data for how each individual local area was affected. As you can see, for number 6, Atlanta and Balance and Fulton are combined into one for convenience from the Department of Labor, so just keep that in mind. We can also tell immediately that Metro Atlanta areas showed the highest numbers rather, but this isn't to say that they were the only ones affected. This is largely due to population demographics, right? So obviously Atlanta has the biggest population of all the cities in the state of Georgia. However, we also need to keep in mind that smaller, more rural areas also were affected, and given the population, it's more about correlation. Also, we need to keep in mind what kind of jobs are in each area. Like I said, with smaller, more rural areas, they're likely to have more agriculture jobs than something like, say, healthcare, so on and so forth. So that also plays a part into these numbers. Industries matter, and determining what industries were most impacted in the local areas is a key point to take in mind when analyzing this data. So just a quick overview of that. You can definitely tell, again, like with the industries, that there was a steep drop off after April. However, once again, this isn't to say that it's stopped, because it obviously hasn't. So where do we go from here? What are some options that we can do to solve this problem? Well, Burning Glass is a website that offers insight into how to best identify employment opportunities due to COVID or post-COVID. And honestly, it has other resources too for economic development resources, for recessions and things of that nature. And one point that they brought across was the concept of lifeboat jobs. And these jobs typically don't require a degree or a certification or any kind of advanced training. Rather, they're more of a pathway from jobs that were potentially lost during COVID or a recession, for that matter, into different jobs that have equivalent pay or could have equivalent pay and a solid future. So it's a transfer of adjacent skills to new jobs, right? So take, for example, a job like a tax accountant. They're going to be using skills such as basic math. They're going to be using Excel. They're going to be using basic communication skills when talking to clients. We can take those adjacent skills and transfer them over to a new job, such as like a hotel secretary. Obviously, they're going to be doing similar things. They're going to be processing invoices, so they need basic math skills. They're going to be using Excel, and they're also going to be talking to clients. who are interested in staying at the hotel or representing them from a PR standpoint. So it's important to keep in mind here that this is not necessarily intended to be a permanent solution to lost jobs from COVID. Instead, it's best to treat it more of as a stepping stone to finding new employment. And as we know, it's better to have some wages coming in than none at all. But at the same time, depending on the hierarchy of the new position with the lifeboat job or prior training, things of that nature, it can be potentially higher paying depending on what the job actually is. And like I said, their previous employment, so on and so forth. But this is a good strategy that we can take into account when business services is more difficult or we need a stepping stone into that. So moving forward.
All right, business services aid recovery. During this time of economic recovery in our local areas, our business relationships will be vital. Now, I know as business service representatives across the state that we have already touched bases and we are familiarized with our local businesses, our local partners and stakeholders, but revisiting those businesses, the partners and stakeholders will be a very good thing to consider now that we are in our post-COVID, to remind them of the services that are available through WorkSource. The services that we offer through our business services programs can be a lifeline to some of our businesses' economic hardships during this time. It is also important that we partner with our career specialists or career consultants that we have in our offices around the state to combat a plan for possible eligible individuals and workshops to prepare dislocated workers to become work ready again. When I served as a career specialist at the local level, working closely with the BSRs served as a great platform to be able to help to manage a pipeline from individuals that are already deemed eligible with WIOA services into the workforce. So just partnering with those career specialists, seeing who do they have on their caseload that could actually fit into some of these industries that are in need of employees. Knowing how many people are on the caseload, who's getting ready to come out of training, and how that can be of benefit to the local workforce. With the increase of unemployment, the needs of services may increase. I remember growing up, my mom would say, sometimes you don't know what you need until you need it. Again, having those business relationships, touching base again with those businesses, reminding them, hey, we do have programs that may be able to assist you. OJT may be an option. Incumbent worker training may be an option. Customized training may be an option. Just to give them a refresher of our services. I know there's not a lot of face-to-face going on during the pandemic, but setting up a virtual meeting just to give them another rundown again of the services that are offered and the way that it can be beneficial to their businesses. We also have to be considerate of the workforce challenges due to COVID-19, the training limitations. Training is different now. You know, a lot of businesses and employers, they're not looking maybe to train face-to-face. So there may be training limitations there where have to work out something to be virtual in order to get the training completed. The business models transitions may be a little different. There may be budget limitations there. So those are just things that we want to be mindful of when we are engaging our partners. Going on to possible budget limitations. So we're definitely not oblivious that there are possible budget limitations that's going on in your local areas. Regions may be experiencing budget limitations, which can delay the possibility and limit the availability of our business service programs. Although we may not be able to offer that due to budget limitations, we can always be a bridge. We can look for opportunities to braid funding. There are other options that may be available to assist with training, such as the Hope Career Grant that could pay for certain trainings based on the high demand industries in the area. We want to involve our partners and utilize our stakeholders, understand the needs of the employers, and involve our local technical colleges, our nonprofit partners, and others that may be able to assist employers. Another way that we can help assist is by our sector partnerships. So the support of sector partnerships. So sector partnerships have been established throughout the state of Georgia. Sector partnerships are kind of taking a closer eye at an industry that is of high demand or industry cluster that is of high demand in the area. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with sector partnerships, but there are leads in your area for sector partnerships that will be able to give you real-time data to help assist the local area. With the sector partnerships, there are already established connection and relationships there with industry partners. And as BSRs, we can tap into that relationship and connection to really get, again, real-time data from our businesses, employers, to understand what their needs are to help to build a possible pipeline employment for WeOR participants and job seekers.
All right, so for virtual presence, this has, for better or worse, become a necessity for our daily lives and how we work and how we just do our daily activities for now and probably for at least a little bit longer. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about social media. This is an often overlooked aspect to the job, but it's actually very useful, right? So most users are actually between the ages of 16 and 44, which, as we know, is the most dominant demographic in workforces globally because people aren't quite to retirement age yet. People are just now entering the workforce. So this demographic is most likely to use social media and gain the most from it. Really quick, I'd like to point your attention to the example on the right here. This is from our friends at WorkSource Cobb. And this is a screenshot of their Twitter account. And this is a perfect example of how a social media account should look for workforce development. It's clean, it's easy to read, it's simple. You can tell from the post at the bottom right there, it takes good advantage of things like hashtags. It's only a few sentences, so it's not like it's not too much. And it's also got a link and a graphic giving more details on their subject. So going off of that, like social media is great for ease of workforce updates, right? Like I said, just a few sentences is all you need to really get your point across. So just being able to have that resource there is very helpful. At the same time, targeted industry posts for workforce opportunities are key. You can make a specific post about, like, say, manufacturing. And while that might not be relevant to everybody, people who are looking for manufacturing jobs are likely going to be linked to that social media post. But at the same time, you can have more general posts too that might show up for web searches for everyone else who might not be a part of one specific industry or who actually might be looking to jump to another industry. I'd also like to take a second to talk about our websites. So obviously not everyone's website is going to be the same, but I think that this is important to note on because when potential participants and companies look at our social media and our websites, that's probably going to be their first impression of us. And as we all have heard before, first impressions matter. So what's most important on our websites and social media is that the information is accurate. So if a local area, or not a local area, excuse me, a participant goes to a website for a local area and the info is inaccurate or it has incorrect dates or something, or it's just outdated, then that might give them the wrong impression. And we don't really want that because we want our info to be as accurate as possible, so it helps them as much as possible. Not every website needs to be super fancy or top of the line, but just making sure that it's easy to understand, it looks clean, it gets the point across, honestly, just really does everything that it's supposed to do, and then all the extra stuff can come later. So how is that relevant to our day-to-day activities? So with the Office of Workforce Development, things have changed drastically, as we all know. Meetings with participants and other partners has drastically changed, as we've touched on before. It's why we're here doing this now instead of having the WorkSource Academy in person. Meetings with participants. I would really like to emphasize the use of video chat. I'm sure everyone's used it at some point. But I think it's really important to note on the fact that we need to have this face-to-face interaction with our actual video chat instead of just having audio, right? Because when we don't have video, we lose that interpersonal connection. And when we lose that interpersonal connection, then that can, I don't want to say come off wrong to potential partners, but it can, having a friendly face there can really make a mile's worth of difference when getting the process started for contracts for business services. But that leads me to my second point with contracts and applications, right? Obviously, we can't meet face-to-face to work these out in person and to hammer out all the details, but we need to really have our stuff together with knowing how to use the softwares for editing contracts and applications, getting them to our companies in a method that's easy to use, quick to understand, and looks good. But most importantly with that, they need to be functional. If they're not functional, then that creates a whole new mess of problems. And like Brittany touched on before, facilitating training has obviously become difficult, especially with different industries, right? Some industries just can't train in person right now. Maybe it's a company by company basis, maybe it's a whole industry. But having the tools to work around that and to really deal with what we're given is absolutely essential for this kind of activity and can make miles and miles of difference when it comes to getting everything flowing and streamlined. So business engagement, right? What do we do when we actually get to meeting with these businesses? First and foremost, we need to speak the language of businesses to demystify our programs, right? So if we go in and we're immediately hammering them with complex terms and acronyms, chances are they're not going to know what we're talking about unless they've dealt with WIO before, and there's a good chance that they haven't, right? They're not going to know what this means, and it might like intimidate them and cause problems later down the line. So whenever we can approach a business with more easily digestible language, then that already is a good sign of where things can go. At the same time, going off of that, we need to demonstrate how business services formalizes what companies already do. We know how successful on-the-job training and incumbent worker training and customized training can be, but like I said before, if they haven't ever dealt with that, then they're probably not going to know how successful it is. Either way, whether or not they choose to go with a business services program, they're going to have to train new employees when they come in. So they're experienced with training as a concept, but when we can combine what we know with what they know and show them how this is a streamlined process and we're going to be here to help you along the way, then that immediately is a good sign for what's to come. And most importantly, we need to add value to each business interaction. If we go in and it's just a soulless meeting with no heart to it and it's just a one and done thing, or we treat it as a one and done thing, then that's not good, right? We need to have more of an interpersonal relationship with this, because partnerships are relational. They're not transactional. It's going to be constant give and take and working with each other to get to the common goal of getting participants trained in a timely, efficient, and successful manner. So instead of transactional, where it would just be a one and done thing and that's that, and we don't want that. So alongside that, we need to build long-lasting relationships. Establishing trust, this is key. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Having the trust of the business that you're interacting with is quite possibly the most important piece of the puzzle when it comes to getting training across. So bringing them to the table, understanding their, having mutual understandings can really help as well. So we are more likely to go into a meeting and have some kind of understanding of what the company is experiencing, either A, because they've contacted us in the past to initiate some kind of service, or we just did prior research as we should before going in. They likely are not going to have the same understandings of what we do as how we understand what they do. And that's not exactly their fault because it's a complicated process. But if we can really bridge that gap, as Brittany mentioned earlier, then that's going to help us in the long run because we can really be on the same page. And that's what it comes down to in the end. Going off of that, it's going to be a long process, as we know. It's not going to be easy every single time. It could be a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, we need to manage our expectations. Some companies who have never dealt with this before might come in with the understanding that, hey, if I do on-the-job training, then this is going to solve all of my problems. And that just, as much as on-the-job training is a successful business services program, that just isn't the case. It can solve some of their problems and lead to more effective solutions in the future, but chances are one training program is not going to solve every single issue that they might be having. And we talked a little bit about virtual presence a few slides ago and how that is essential to helping the process. Obviously, it can complicate things even more if either things are hard on them or hard on us. So really hammering out all of the details as best we can is obviously very beneficial. Obviously, technology fails us. It's not a perfect solution to what we're dealing with COVID, but we can make the best of it by using what we know best and using the easiest process possible. I would like to show you guys really quick the Georgia labor market website. And this is the last thing I have for you really quickly in case you'd like to see the data in the future. So let me just, okay. So when you type in Georgia labor market on Google search, this will be the first website that comes up. And this is the Department of Labor website that I mentioned earlier from where we got our graphs. All you need to do really to find the data that we use is to go to most requested right here and click initial claims by area and industry. And when you click that, it will take you to this page right here. And what you can do is you can go to weekly initial claims downloads, click that, and you'll be greeted with this drop-down menu. And it gives you a couple different options, but for the ones we used the local workforce development area option. Whoops, I didn't mean to click that. We use the local workforce development area option and the statewide option. And if you can see it right here, it immediately downloaded. And when you click it, it'll open up the Excel sheet with everything you need on it, and it'll have a week-by-week basis or structure. And all of this data is updated every Friday morning, I believe, either Thursday night or Friday morning. That's all we have for you today. So I'll turn it over to Brittany for some questions.
Thank you, John. All right, so we already have some questions that have been entered into the chat. So we want to give you guys a few seconds to kind of think over the presentation and type your questions in the chat so that we can respond to them. So we'll give you guys a few seconds and then I'll go over some of the questions that were asked. All right, so we had a few questions again that was already posted in the chat. So we provided the website for Burning Glass that John was referring to during one of his slides about the lifeboats. So that's in the chat if anyone else was wondering about that.
And it's also linked at the bottom of the PowerPoint. So when that goes out, whenever it does, you can go to that particular slide and click on the article at the bottom.
Awesome, thanks, John. We also had a question about the sector partnership information. So as mentioned, there are active sector partnerships in the regions across the state. So we did provide the website for that particular region to someone who asked. Then we had a question about the social media training. John was talking about social media and your virtual presence. There's also a website that has been provided for anyone who wants to look deeper into the social media training.
And also alongside that, I believe Burning Glass also offers some insight into social media. I could be mistaken, but I believe I saw some articles on there talking about it.
Great, thank you, John. And we also had a question asking, do you think the unemployment figures, oh, sorry, I think I scrolled too fast. Do you think the unemployment figures are affected by people not filing any claims?
I would honestly say yes, because sometimes we get warn notices that were filled out later than they should have been from companies. So I think that can definitely have an effect on it. I know in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of companies, when they had closures or layoffs, they were intended to be, temporary, but that didn't quite happen or people didn't get back to work as soon as they were expecting. So if, say, a manufacturing plant closed in April, they might have been expecting to come back by the end of May. But obviously, the pandemic went on for a lot longer than people expected. So they ended up having to file warn notices that backtracked on when the initial closure or layoff might have happened. So to answer your question, yes, I would say that that's probably affected. However, understanding how much it probably affected, we really can't know for sure, because we're still constantly getting more notices in that contributes to the data.
Thank you, John. Also want to mention that unemployment does not account for folks that are no longer seeking work. So I want to also keep that in mind as well. I want to add something about sector partnerships. We do have information listed on the TCSG site for sector partnerships for the state, but also your local regions, they do have their sites that is localized for their sector partnerships in that region. So if you're interested in knowing the Pacific website as it relates to your regions, you can send me an email, give me a phone call, and I'll be more than happy to get that information for you. So we did provide it to someone who asked about Cobb County. And so we're able to give them the website and information as it related to their region. So if you have a question as far as sector partnerships and where can you go to find information for your localized region, then just let me know. Like we had another question come in. In terms of warn notices, are there best practices, especially related to COVID, with engaging companies facing layoffs and dislocated workers?
Hey guys, I'm happy to take this. This is Brittany Bullock. So I would say the best practices for warn notices. So the Georgia Department of Labor is always going to be that initial point of contact. They are reaching out to each employer that submits a warn notice, and they are offering virtual services at this time. So they have the opportunity to have that virtual employee information session where all of our partners get together and have the opportunity to just provide the resources that help individuals with their transition during a layoff. And so I would say the best practice right now is to be fully engaged with the Georgia Department of Labor. They CC our local partners on each warn notice that they receive. So when you receive that, just try to be an active partner and reach back out to them and find out, what are the services that you are providing to this employer and how can we assist. Alan Carson with the Department of Labor is super responsive and available at any time for any status updates that you would like to receive regarding warn notices in your area.
Thank you, Brittany. Do we have any more questions before we close out?
Great questions, by the way.
Going once. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Well, you guys can definitely reach out to us. We are here to assist in any way that is needed. We do have our contact information on the last slide, and I will hand the floor back over to Ms. Robin.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Again, as a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording and the webinar materials within a week. And we thank you again for participating in today's webinar, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. Take care.